and welcome to the Lazy Book Club podcast, the book club for those who don't want to read or leave the house. My name is Matt Gonzalez.
My name's David Cox.
And my name is Josh Matheson.
And this week we are looking at chapter 8 of Peter Pan, which is The Mermaid's Lagoon, if I remember correctly.
Whoop, whoop.
Mermaid's Lagoon.
See, someone actually bothered to check what the title from last week was before they started recording.
If you'd have asked me what it was, I probably wouldn't have got it. Because
to be fair, in this game of Guess the Week Before's chapter, though, you are beating me because you remembered the bunker and you remembered the flight, and I didn't remember any of those.
But you remembered who remembered out of the two of you, which I
So I'm the ultimate rememberer.
I didn't remember that I remembered, if that makes sense.
So this chapter, I'm pretty sure I know what happens in this one because this seems to be very much in line with the Disney film. I remember there being a lagoon. And
that relies on me having watched the film, at some point in the last 15 to 20 years, which I don't think I have.
No. The thing that's confused is I know Hook better, and of course it's not the same.
No, this isn't in Hook, this scene.
No.
This is definitely in the Disney film.
Hook's a sequel, yeah.
Yes.
Unless they have like a coloured food fight. I don't know.
I believe this is a tale of adventure where Peter Pan tries to save a certain little Native American girl.
Can we just also, because it's my one sort of resounding thing from last week, that this might not be the best story that J M Barrie could have told us, but the one he chose us.
Get onto
yeah. So just bear that in mind. If there's any elements of this story that you're disappointed by,
yeah.
He literally admitted that this wasn't the best of the tales he could have
It's
been.
true.
Yeah.
And that he wishes one of the others had won the coin toss, which he did in his study while he was writing this novel.
Should I do it again? It's like,
no.
What do you mean? You're in charge. I don't care. Just tell me a story. Get on with it,
last
Barry.
week we just got a snapshot as to how life is continuing at the moment in Neverland. We don't know how long Wendy, John and Michael have been there for. He doesn't seem to be that interested in telling us, but they seem to have gotten into some kind of daily routine now where they're going out on adventures. Wendy is stuck stirring imaginary soup every day because she's a woman and apparently the kitchen is her place. And J M Barrie kind of told us about the kids slightly forgetting their life before, forgetting their parents, Wendy giving them exams to check if they remember. And then he just gave us a lowdown on a few of the adventures that these kids have been having over the last however many days they've been here, and has just picked one, and he's going to tell us about that. Now, bear in mind when you listen to this chapter that other contestants for this were a fight between the Native Americans and the Lost Boys where they swap sides, the Captain Hook chocolate cake caper where Wendy kept running away with the cake.
Which was set up as literally like it could be the narrative of this book.
The main idea of the book, yeah.
And then it's just been thrown.
Thrown
by the wayside.
It's been thrown to the wayside, and Captain Hook has tripped over it. Apparently,
imagine if J M Barrie had done the first ever Choose Your Adventure book, because you sometimes have those ones. I always thought they were amazing.
Goosebumps used to do a Choose Your Own.
I just thought I was the creator of a universe. Like I thought no one else has gone through this, path. We could have had.
I have.
Mind you, how long would the podcast take if we had to record 5 or 6 different strata?
Right, so Mermaid's Lagoon.
Yeah.
The story that won the coin toss.
Correct.
I say, I'm pretty sure I know what's coming, but let's see if what I think is coming is coming.
Great.
So should we dive in?
What I have no idea is coming. Chapter 8. The Mermaid's Lagoon. If you shut your eyes, and you are a lucky one, you may see at times a shapeless pool of lovely pale colours suspended in the darkness. Then, if you squeeze your eyes tighter, the pool begins to take shape, and the colours become so vivid that with another squeeze they must go on fire. But just before they go on fire, you see the lagoon.
I've just tried that, and all I'm seeing is spots.
Yeah.
Okay, let's all try it, which is great. Great fodder for a podcast.
And those eye worms or whatever. Those little little fluffy bits you can see going across. Yeah, squiggly.
On the corner.
But when you try and look at it, it keeps
throw
moving.
it away. Family Guy.
I got nothing today.
Yeah, no, I just open my eyes and all I can see is just white spots. Apparently that's the Mermaid's Lagoon though, so there we go. Keep going. I know what it looks like now.
Who knew? There we go. This is the nearest you ever get to it on the mainland. Just one heavenly moment. If there could be two moments, you might see the surf and hear the mermaid singing. The children often spent long summer days on this lagoon, swimming or floating most of the time, playing the mermaid games in the water and so forth. You must not think from this that the mermaids were on friendly terms with them. On the contrary, it was among Wendy's lasting regrets that all the time she was on the island, she never had a civil word from one of them.
Wendy is one of those girls that girls love to hate.
Yeah.
Everywhere she goes, every single girl just like, don't like her.
I'm imagining like the mermaids are like the plastics in Mean Girls.
Yeah.
Ew.
Definitely.
You can't sit with us.
On Wednesdays we wear fins. Hey.
When she stole softly to the edge of the lagoon, she might see them by the score, especially on Maruna's Rock, where they so loved to bask, combing out their hair in a lazy way that quite irritated her. Or she might even swim on tiptoe, as it were, to within a yard of them. But then they saw her and dived, probably splashing her with their tails, not by accident, but intentionally.
Ooh.
Bitches. Cut it out! Cut that out! It's expletive. No, cut it out.
I say keep it in.
Had to get a little beep.
Yeah. Well, like
We had orgy a couple
a
of weeks
duck
ago.
quack. Yeah, but orgy's in the book. If it's a swear word and it's in the
true.
book, it's fine.
Yeah,
Okay, fine.
it's true.
They treated all the boys in the same way, except, of course, Peter, who chatted with them on Maruna's Rock by the hour and sat on their tails when they got cheeky. He gave Wendy one of their combs. The most haunting time at which to see them is at the turn of the moon, when they utter strange wailing cries. But the lagoon is dangerous for mortals then, and until the evening of which we have now to tell, Wendy had never seen the lagoon by moonlight. Less from fear, for of course Peter would have accompanied her, than because she had strict rules about everyone being in bed by 7. 7?
What's the point? Like, they didn't have to go to
7?
work.
We're in a world where there are no adults, and
Yeah.
she's making everyone go to bed by 7.
Horrendous.
Buzzkill, man.
Yeah. It's still daylight.
She was often at the lagoon, however, on sunny days after rain, when the mermaids came up in extraordinary numbers to play with their bubbles.
Yay!
I don't know what that
They're
looks
very
like.
simple folk.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Like the mystical creatures, but they're like, ooh.
Bubbles.
I love bubbles.
We're painting the room.
My bubble.
My bubbles. The bubbles of many colours made in rainbow water they treat as balls, hitting them gaily from one to another with their tails, and trying to keep them in the rainbow till they burst. The goals are at each end of the rainbow, and the keepers only are allowed to use their hands. Sometimes a dozen of these games will be going on in the lagoon at a time, and it is quite a pretty sight. But the moment the children tried to join in, they had to play by themselves, for the mermaids immediately disappeared. Nevertheless, we have proof that they secretly watched the interlopers, and were not above taking an idea from them, for John introduced a new way of hitting the bubble, with the head instead of the hand, and the mermaids adopted it. This is the one mark that John has left on the Neverland. He's left head-
What an achievement.
Yeah.
He's given them a header.
The Lost Boys versus the Pirates.
Mermaids United.
Yeah.
It must also have been rather pretty to see the children resting on a rock for half an hour after a midday meal. Wendy insisted on their doing this, and it had to be a real rest, even though the meal was make-believe. So they lay there in the sun, and their bodies glistened in it, while she sat beside them and looked important. It was one such day, and they were all on Maruna's Rock. The rock was not much larger than their great bed, but of course they knew how not to take up much room. and they were dozing, or at least lying with their eyes shut, and pinching occasionally when they thought Wendy was not looking. She was very busy, stitching. While she stitched, a change came to the lagoon. Little shivers ran over it, and the sun went away, and shadows stole across the water, turning it cold. Wendy could no longer see to thread her needle, and when she looked up, the lagoon, that had always hitherto been such a laughing place, seemed formidable and unfriendly. It was not, she knew, that night had come, but something as dark as night had come. No, worse than that. It had not come, but it had sent that shiver through the sea to say that it was coming. What was it? There, crowded upon her, all the stories she had been told of Maroona's Rock, so called because evil captains put sailors on it and leave them there to drown. They drown when the tide rises, for then it is submerged. Of course, she should have roused the children at once, not merely because of the unknown that was stalking toward them, but because it was no longer good for them to sleep on a rock grown chilly. But she was a young mother, and she did not know this. She thought you must simply stick to your rule for half an hour after your midday meal. So, though fear was upon her, and she longed to hear male voices, she would not waken them. Even when she heard the sound of muffled oars, though her heart was in her mouth, she did not waken them.
So the pirates are coming.
It could be the pirates. I mean,
I think it's the pirates.
sounds like it's...
A muffled oar. What does that sound like? Oh, it's like that. It's that lovely sound. Is it like when it's like a really flat water, and you just like it's just like that little ploppy sound. It's like one of my favourite noises.
Eerie ploppy, yeah.
Eerie ploppy.
It sounds like someone's pseudonym. It sounds like an author.
Eerie ploppy.
The Quiet Lagoon by Eerie Ploppy.
She stood over them to let them have their sleep out. Was it not brave of Wendy? It was well for those boys that there was among them one who could sniff danger even in his sleep. Peter sprang erect, as wide awake as once as a dog. Oh. I'm sorry, I can't get over Peter sprang erect.
Nothing to see here. I don't see why we would comment.
Yeah, I was inwardly sniggering it.
It's not that sort of podcast.
Peter sprang erect, as wide awake at once as a dog, and with one warning cry he roused the others. He stood motionless, one hand to his ear. "Pirates!" he cried. The others came closer to him. A strange smile was playing about his face, and Wendy saw it and shuddered. While that smile was on his face, no one dared address him. All they could do was to stand ready to obey. The order came sharp and incisive. "Dive!" There was a gleam of legs, and instantly the lagoon seemed deserted. Maroona's Rock stood alone in the forbidding waters, as if it were itself marooned. The boat drew nearer. It was the pirate dinghy, with 3 figures in her, Smee and Starkey, and the third captive, no other than Tiger Lily. Her hands and ankles were tied, and she knew what was to be her fate. She was to be left on the rock to perish, an end to one of her race more terrible than death by fire or torture, for it is not written in the book of the tribe that there is no path through water to the happy hunting ground. Yet her face was impassive. She was the daughter of a chief. She must die as a chief's daughter. It is enough. They had caught her boarding the pirate ship with a knife in her mouth. No watch was kept on the ship, it being Hook's boast that the wind of his name guarded the ship for a mile around. Now her fate would help to guard it also. One more whale would go the round in that wind by night.
I'm guessing that was a whale as in WAIL, not a whale as in a giant mammal.
Yeah, it wasn't it was a whale. A whale. As opposed to a whale.
It's a whale.
Whale.
In the gloom that they brought with them, the 2 pirates did not see the rock till they crashed into it. "Laugh, you lubber!" cried an Irish voice that was Smee's. Here's the rock. Now then, what you have to do is to hoist the redskin onto it and leave her here to drown. It was the work of one brutal moment to land the beautiful girl on the rock. She was too proud to offer a vain resistance. Quite near the rock, but out of sight, two heads were bobbing up and down. Peter's and Wendy's. Wendy was crying, for it was the first tragedy she had seen. Peter had seen many tragedies, but had forgotten them all. He was less sorry than Wendy for Tiger Lily. It was 2 against 1 that angered him, and he meant to save her. An easy way would have been to wait until the pirates had gone, but he was never one to choose the easy way. There was almost nothing he could not do, and he now imitated the voice of Hook. So technically this is Peter imitating Hook. So is he very good at it? That's what I need to know.
Well, I mean, I have a feeling, judging from how I know in the film, that he does actually manage to convince them that it is Hook speaking.
He's
so
pretty
I think
good at the
I
impression.
think he is good at it. But this is one of these actor challenges. It's when you see actors in TV where they're having to play. It's an actor playing a character who's an actor playing a character. Do you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
In the interest of doing an impression of someone doing an impression, can you try and imitate Mel Gibson's Braveheart? So it's like a 70% good Scottish accent. It's not quite there, but it's...
Okay,
you're trying to get him to blend it a bit more to kind of make it where, like, every now and then Peter sneaks through by mistake.
Yeah, essentially.
all right. I mean, I can try. I don't know how much he says.
You can try.
There was almost nothing that he could not do, and now he imitated the voice of Hook. Ahoy there, you lubbers, he called. It was a marvellous imitation.
See, that was good. I heard the little Peter twang in there as well.
Do you think?
Yeah.
You don't think that just sounded like a bad Hook? Okay, good. Well,
No, because it kind of sounded convincing enough, but you could tell it was slightly flawed.
Yeah. Hopefully you won't have to do this for that long, unless the Lost Boys put on a play. That's like
Or Peter, like, skins Hook and assumes his identity.
yeah, just wears it.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Hook. That was mine.
So good.
Is that you from the Caribbean?
Yeah. Yeah. I've just moved.
I also love the fake Hook hand.
A Hook puppet show.
We've already got David Dickfingers, or whatever it's called.
Like David Copperfield.
Captain Cox.
That's his name. That's who I meant.
Is that like David Dickinson, who just used to do Antique
Yeah.
Radio?
Just like that. And now we'll do some kind of...
Fingers.
And now we can add to that, like, David does Punch and Judy with Hook. The captain, said the pirates, staring at each other in surprise. He must be swimming out to us, Starkey said, when they had looked for him in vain.
Sorry, can we just think about the logic of that? Swimming. Because that's what your captain's going to do. He's going to swim to you. You took the boat, so instead of coming out... this is already flawed.
We're putting the redskin on the rock, Smee called out. Set her free, came the astonishing answer. Free? Yes, cut her bonds and let her go. But, Captain, at once, d'ye hear? Cried Peter, or I'll plunge my hook in you. This is queer, Smee gasped.
You're telling me?
Better do what the captain orders, said Starkey nervously. Aye, aye, Smee said, and he cut Tiger Lily's cords. At once, like an eel, she slid between Starkey's legs into the water. Of course, Wendy was very elated over Peter's cleverness, but she knew that he would be elated also and very likely crow and thus betray himself, so at once her hand went over to cover his mouth. But it was stayed even in the act, For "Port ahoy!" rang over the lagoon in Hook's voice, and this time it was not Peter who had spoken. So the real guys.
So Captain Hook
locked
is
up.
actually having a nice little swim in the lagoon, apparently.
Apparently,
Wearing
yeah.
his sort of Victorian swimming costume.
Yes. The red and white stripy bathing
Oh
suit.
yeah, I think because he'd have the curly moustache and he looked great.
Peter may have been about to crow, but his face puckered in a whistle of surprise instead. "Port ahoy!" came the voice again. Now Wendy understood. The real Hook was also in the water. He was swimming to the boat, and as his men showed a light to guide him, he had soon reached them. In the light of the lantern, Wendy saw his hook grip the boat's side. She saw his evil, swarthy face as he rose, dripping from the water, and quaking. She would have liked to swim away, but Peter would not budge.
Why is Hook swimming?
I don't know what
He's the
doing.
captain.
Yeah.
He's doing a sponsored swimathon for the month.
He was tingling with life, but also top-heavy with conceit. "Am I not a wonder? Oh, I am a wonder," he whispered to her. And though she thought so also, she was really glad for the sake of his reputation that no one heard him except herself. He signed to her to listen. The two pirates were very curious to know what had brought their captain to them, but he sat with his head on his hook in a position of profound melancholy. "Captain, is all well?" they asked timidly, but he answered with a hollow moan. "He sighs," said Smee. "He sighs again," said Starkey. "And yet a third time he sighs," said Smee. Then at last he spoke passionately. "The game's up," he cried. "Those boys have found a mother." Affrighted though she was, Wendy swelled with pride. "Oh, evil day!" cried Starkey. "What's a mother?" asked the ignorant Smee. Wendy was so shocked that she exclaimed, "He doesn't know!" And always after this, she felt as though if you could pet a pirate, Smee would be her one.
I'm gonna pet a pirate
you
or
pet a
two.
pirate?
Boy. I'm gonna pet a pirate or two.
Brand new Pet a Pirate from Zap Creation. Peter pulled her beneath the water, for Hook had started up, crying, "What was that?" "I heard nothing," said Starkey, raising the lantern over the waters, and as the pirates looked, they saw a strange sight. It was the nest I have told you of, floating on the lagoon, and the Neverbird was sitting on it. I don't remember this nest.
The Neverbird was this bird that Peter protects or tells people to leave alone. He seems to have this weird kind of connection with it, or really tries to look out for it. But that was it. It was only mentioned in passing in 2 sentences.
Interesting.
I think it was mentioned either last chapter or the chapter before.
Okay. "See," said Hook, in answer to Smee's question. "That is a mother. What a lesson! The nest must have fallen into the water. But would the mother desert her eggs? No." There was a break in his voice, as if for a moment he recalled innocent days but he brushed away this weakness with his hook. Smee, much impressed, gazed at the bird as the nest was borne past, but the more suspicious Starkey said, "If she is a mother, perhaps she is hanging about here to help Peter." Hook winced. "Aye," he said, "that is the fear that haunts me." He was roused from this dejection by Smee's eager voice. "Captain," said Smee, "could we not kidnap these boys' mother and make her our mother?" "It is a princely scheme," cried Hook, and at once it took practical shape in his great brain. "We will seize the children and carry them to the boat, and the boys we will make walk the plank, and Wendy shall become our mother."
How do they know she's called Wendy?
I don't know.
Because Hook and that lot have never met her, so I don't understand how they know what her name
I
is.
think they have a newspaper on the island.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Neverland Herald. Again, Wendy forgot herself. Never! She cried and bobbed. What was that? But they could see nothing. They thought it must have been a leaf in the wind. Do you agree, my bullies? Asked Hook. There's my hand written on it, they both said. And there's my hook, swear. They all swore. By this time they were on the rock, and suddenly Hook remembered Tiger Lily. Where is the red skin? He demanded abruptly. He had a playful humour at moments, and they thought that this was one of the moments. That is all right, Captain, Smee answered complacently. We let her go. Let her go! Cried Hook. 'Twas your own orders, the boatswain faltered. You called over the water to us to let her go, said Starkey. Brimstone and gall, thundered Hook. What cozening, cheating is going on here? His face had gone black with rage, but he saw that they believed their words, and he was startled. Lads, he said, shaking a little, I give no such order. It was passing queer, Smee said, and they all fidgeted uncomfortably. Hook raised his voice, but there was a quiver in it. Spirit that haunts me in this dark lagoon tonight, he cried. Dost hear me? Of course, Peter should have kept quiet, but of course he did not. He immediately answered in Hook's voice. Odds, bobs, hammer, and tongs, I hear you. In that supreme moment, Hook did not blanch, even at the gills, but Smee and Starkey clung to each other in terror. Who are you, stranger? Speak, Hook demanded. I am James Hook, replied the voice, captain of the Jolly Roger. You are not, Hook cried hoarsely. Brimstone and gall, the voice retorted. Say that again and I'll cast anchor in you. Hook tried a more ingratiating manner. If you are Hook, he said, almost humbly, come, tell me, who am I? A codfish, replied.
That's what I thought.
Only a codfish. The classic insult of all insults. Yeah. A codfish, Hook echoed blankly. And it was then, but not till then, that his proud spirit broke. He saw his men draw back from him. We've been captured all this time by a codfish, they muttered. It is lowering our pride.
You going to take his word for it? Like,
also, apparently that really is the king of all.
It must be true then.
A weird voice said it. They were his dogs snapping at him, but tragic figure though he had become, he scarcely needed them. Against such fearful evidence, it was not their belief in him that he needed. It was his own. He felt his ego slipping from him. Don't desert me, bully, he whispered hoarsely to it. In his dark nature there was a touch of the feminine, as in all great pirates, and it sometimes gave him intuitions. There we
all
go.
the best pirates
nice
like camp and effeminate.
Yeah.
Ever so slightly. Suddenly he tried the guessing game. Hook, he called. Have you another voice? Now Peter could never resist a game, and he answered blithely in his own voice. I have! And another name. I! Vegetable? Asked Hook. No.
What?
Mineral. No.
Oh.
Animal? Yes. Man? No. This answer rang out scornfully. Boy? Yes. Ordinary boy? No. Wonderful boy. To Wendy's pain, the answer that rang out this time was, yes! Are you in England? No. Are you here? Yes!
Waste of a question.
Yeah.
No,
Waste of a question. The first question was, are you a vegetable?
uh-huh.
Hook was completely puzzled. You ask him some questions, he said to the others, wiping his damp brow. Smee reflected. I can't think of a thing, he said regretfully. Can't guess, crowed Peter. Do you give up? Of course, in his pride, he was carrying the game too far, and the miscreants, villains, saw their chance. Yes, they answered eagerly. Well then, he cried, I am Peter Pan. Pan. In a moment, Hook was himself again, and Smee and Starkey were his faithful henchmen. Now we have him, Hook shouted. Into the water, Smee. Starkey, mind a boat. Take him dead or alive. He leapt as he spoke, and simultaneously came the gay voice of Peter. Are you ready, boys?
That could not have
That
been
was such an unfortunate line. Are you ready, boys?
I remember getting an illustration of like just Peter Pan looking like a teasy like look over the shoulder, and then like a glitter. Are you ready, boys? And like it's like a poster I'd seen down like Compton Street or something.
Exactly.
Like a club night at GAY.
Aye, from various parts of the lagoon. Then lam into the pirates. The fight was short and sharp. First to draw blood was John, who gallantly climbed into the boat and held Starkey. There was fierce struggle in which the cutlass was torn from the pirate's grasp. He wriggled overboard and John leapt after him. The dinghy drifted away. Here and there a head bobbed up in the water, and there was a flash of steel followed by a cry or a whoop. In the confusion, some struck at their own side. The corkscrew of Smee got Tootles in the fourth rib, and he was himself nicked in turn by Curly. Farther from the rock, Starkey was pressing slightly, and the twins hard. Where all this time was Peter? He was seeking bigger game. The others were all brave boys, and they must not be blamed for backing from the pirate captain. His iron claw made a circle of dead water round him, from which they fled like affrighted fishes. But there was one who did not fear him. There was one prepared to enter that circle. Strangely, it was not in the water that they met. Hook rose to the rock to breathe, and at the same moment Peter scaled it on the opposite side. The rock was slippery as a ball, and they had to crawl rather than climb. Neither knew that the other was coming. Each feeling for a grip meant the other's arm. In surprise, they raised their heads. Their faces were almost touching. So they met. Some of their greatest heroes have confessed that just before they fell to began combat, they had a sinking feeling in the stomach. Had it been so with Peter in that moment, I would admit it. After all, he was the only man that the sea cook had feared. But Peter had no sinking. He had one feeling only, gladness, and he gnashed his pretty teeth with joy. Quick as thought,
he's a psychopath.
He is. He does have some murderous tendencies.
Imagine if you were like out with someone and like their way of being like glad, or instead of going woo, is going like that, like some sort of
yeah, that's very feral, isn't it?
I'd leave.
Yeah. Quick as thought, he snatched a knife from Hook's belt and was about to drive it home when he saw he was higher up the rock than his foe. It would not have been fighting fair. He gave the pirate a hand to help him up. It was then that Hook bit him. Not the pain of this, but its unfairness was what dazed Peter. It made him quite helpless. He could only stare, horrified. Every child is affected thus the first time he is treated unfairly. All he thinks he has a right to when he comes to you to be yours is fairness. After you have been unfair to him, he will love you again, but will never afterwards be quite the same boy. No one ever gets over the first unfairness. No one except Peter. He often met it, but he always forgot it. I suppose that was the real difference between him and all the rest. So when he met it now, it was like the first time. He could just stare, helpless. Twice the iron hand clawed him. A few moments afterwards, the other boys saw Hook in the water, striking wildly for the ship. No elation on the pestilent face now, only white fear, for the crocodile was in dogged pursuit of him. On ordinary occasions the boys would have swum alongside, cheering, but now they were uneasy, for they had lost both Peter and Wendy, and were scouring the lagoon for them, calling them by name. They found the dinghy and went home in it, shouting, "Peter! Wendy!" as they went, but no answer came, save mocking laughter from the mermaids. "They must be swimming back, or flying," the boys concluded. They were not very anxious, because they had such faith in Peter. They chuckled, boy-like, because they would be late for bed, and it was all Mother Wendy's fault.
Yeah, of course.
Of course it is, yeah. When their voices died away, there came cold silence over the lagoon, and then a feeble cry. "Help! Help!" Two small figures were beating against the rock. The girl had fainted and lay on the boy's arm. With a last effort, Peter pulled her up the rock and then lay down beside her. Even as he also fainted, he saw that the water was rising. He knew they would soon be drowned, but he could do no more. As they lay side by side, a mermaid caught Wendy by the feet and began pulling her softly into the water. Peter, feeling her slip from him, woke with a start, but was just in time to draw her back. But he had to tell her the truth. "We're on the rock, Wendy," he said, "but it's growing smaller. Soon the water will be over it." She did not understand even now. "We must go," she said almost brightly. "Yes," he answered faintly. "Shall we swim or fly, Peter?" He had to tell her. "Do you think you could swim or fly as far as the island, Wendy, without my help?" She had to admit that she was too tired. He moaned. "What is it?" she asked, anxious about him at once. "I can't help you, Wendy. Hook wounded me. I can neither fly nor swim." "What, do you mean we shall both be drowned?" "Look how the water is rising." They put their hands over their eyes to shut out the sight. They saw that they would soon be no more. As they sat thus, something brushed against Peter, as light as a kiss, and stayed there, as if saying timidly, "Can I be of any use?" It was the tail of a kite, which Michael had made some days before. It had torn itself out of his hand and floated away. "Michael's kite," Peter said, without interest. But next moment he had seized the tail and was pulling the kite toward him. "It lifted Michael off the ground," he cried. "Why should it not carry you? Both of us."
Pretty sure that's not how kites work, but never mind.
"Yeah." "It can't lift two. Michael and Curly tried." "Well, let's draw lots," Wendy said bravely. "And you a lady? Never." Already he had tied the tail around her. She clung to him. She refused to go without him, but with a "Goodbye, Wendy," he pushed her from the rock, and in a few minutes she was borne out of his sight. Peter was alone on the lagoon. The rock was very small now. Soon it would be submerged. Pale rays of light tiptoed across the waters, and by there was to be heard a sound at once the most musical and the most melancholy in the world. The mermaids calling to the moon. Peter was not quite like other boys, but he was afraid at last. A tremor ran through him, like a shudder passing over the sea. But on the sea one shudder follows another, till there are hundreds of them, and Peter felt just the one. Next moment he was standing erect on the rock again, with that smile on his face and a drum beating within him. It was saying, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." End of chapter.
That's a famous quote.
It is.
Is it?
Yes.
It sounds like something they'd write under a plaque. Or like, you know, you were saying there's some Peter Pan stuff in Hyde Park. It's the type of thing that someone would put on like a grave or...
It's like it's the only thing that he has no concept of. In a way.
It says here on Lit Chart...
Lit chart!
on the end that Peter's life is an unscrutable series of adventures. He has had so many and for so long, it seems he must be having at least several at a time. His time moves in leaps and jolts, so he has no reason to believe that the adventure of death will be his last. So it's almost like it's just another chapter to him. So Peter might be dead, or dying. I mean, we're hoping that in the next chapter he gets saved. But at least there's a cliffhanger from Barrie. We've been missing those for the last couple of chapters. It just fizzled out.
Good and really nice, sort of a nice heroic moment from our hero of him saying, "I'm not going. No,
I'm going to save someone else instead of myself."
Exactly. He's like, "No, Rose, you will stay on the door, and I will fix it."
Even though there's room for both.
Yeah. Even though we could both fit.
I thought there was some beautiful description in that particular chapter with the lagoon. Like, it was really sort of, I think it's some of the nicest parts of the book so far. It was really well painted. I was like, I can kind of imagine that. I'm sort of seeing all these.
It was nice that there was actually some action as well. We finally had the Lost Boys meeting the pirates.
Yeah.
Because up till now, we've had each group and they've not met each other yet.
Yeah.
It's true. It was another one of those chapters that felt like a contained short. Like, I think you said that a couple of weeks ago, David, about them just sort of feeling like they were whole. Like you had, you know, a sort of a beginning, middle, and granted a cliffhanger end, but it sort of had a sense of finality to it. It started off with, you know, like another jovial day at the Rock, and then you had the adventure, and you had a rescue mission, and then a battle, and it was sort of everything you'd want from a children's story, just in one.
But then this is a flashback. If you remember, this is Barrie saying these are all the adventures they've had, and we're going to go back and tell you one of them. So he's already spoiled that Peter Pan must survive, because where we left off in the last chapter is in the future of this chapter. So therefore, he must still be alive. But there's a couple of concepts in this chapter which are quite interesting. There's one about fairness. I don't know if you noticed that in the fight between Hook and Peter Pan. Where Peter gives Hook a hand up because he noticed that he's higher on the rock than Hook, and it gives him an unfair advantage in the fight.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's just standard warfare, isn't it? You're like, you make sure that you're higher than your enemy so that you've got the advantage. And
I have the higher ground, Anakin, or whatever it is.
That's it. Yeah. Great reference there, Matt.
But J M Barrie basically is trying to point on the fact that fairness is the child's version of justice, which is meant to ensure that all people are treated equally and without undue bias. Peter's preoccupation with fairness means that he is concerned in every encounter to ensure that he and his opponent are equally matched. Yet Peter is quicker than Hook, and Hook is less scrupulous, so it is impossible to create equivalence between them. So you notice there's a lot of times where kids are very, very hot on that's not fair.
Yeah.
You've treated that person differently from me. But they don't seem to recognize that someone else's circumstance might be different from theirs.
Yeah.
They don't understand that everybody isn't equal in terms of how they can function in their capacities, maybe that be mentally or physically or anything like that, or financially. They don't understand that. All they understand is you are treating that person differently from that person, and therefore that is unfair and it is not right. And that's a very childish way of looking at morality. Whereas a more adult way of morality will look at two people and go, we should distribute this by what is needed rather than by what is equal.
Do we think Wendy might display some sort of opposition to that, perhaps? because she's got a bit more.
I don't know if it's necessarily meant to be a wider thing to do with Wendy. I think it's just the fact that Barry has just noticed something in terms of how children look at the world, that fairness is something that's very important to them.
Yeah, and Peter Pan is the ultimate child.
But
yeah,
it's something that's quite naive. And I think that's why a lot of times socialist parties and things like that can come across quite naive and quite childish. I think that, wanting to make the world a fairer, more equal, more just place is a very kind of good thing to try and do. But it just shows you that justice in terms of adult justice is very different from fairness. Something can be just, but it can also be unfair.
That is a profound statement there. I feel like I need to sort of sit on it for a moment, but that's not interesting to listen to on a podcast.
Do you know what I mean? Like, say you have two people and you go, oh, I have some money to give, but giving it all to one person because they need it and the other person doesn't is just. It's not fair, but it's just.
Two different things.
Exactly.
And then Captain Hook stitches him up anyway, so it's probably his weakness.
Well, yeah, I mean, Captain Hook just shows his true colours.
Maybe that's Peter Pan's weakness. I mean, we think, he's brave, he's agile, he's strong, he's confident, but this is maybe his major weakness.
Well, his major weakness is that he's a child, and children don't know that the world isn't fair.
Okay, so every aspect of and
he is a child and he never learns. And because he is perpetually a child, he never learns that the world will be unfair and that you have to prepare for that and you have to be able to deal with that. So that's something I thought was actually quite profound. And it's something that's hidden kind of in the battle between them, but it's actually quite interesting when you unpack it. So that's why I just wanted to highlight that one. And then there's also a whole theme to do with ego. So see, Hook and Peter are almost like two sides of the same coin. They're very, very alike in a lot of ways and then completely different in another.
Yeah, their ego definitely seems to be their vice, doesn't it?
Yes.
That's what gave Peter away with the game,
But Litchard's just kind of saying here that Peter attempts to switch places with Hook the way that the boys switch places with the Indians, but neither Peter nor Hook are really willing to play the game. The little boys lose nothing by being other people, but Peter and Hook temporarily lose something they both cherish dearly, their egos. Hook does not play the game because loss of ego is too frightening, and Peter does not persist because recovery of ego is too appealing. So both of them are egomaniacs, and they didn't want to pretend to be the other person because they didn't want to lose their own identity, and they enjoy being themselves too much, and they think so much of themselves that the idea of someone else pretending to be me and almost taking the mickey out of me, I can't handle that. Therefore, I must end the game and I must reclaim who I am and reclaim my ego because it will bruise me too much to watch someone else pretend to be
Whereas
me.
like Peter Pan he was in the upper hand there, and that was again a weakness was the ego. He could have actually used that to sneak on board or something, but
he was too preoccupied with showing off. And admitting, are you the wonderful boy? Yes! Thank you for noticing.
His favourite thing is saying,
I am wonderful.
I am Peter Pan. I bet he says that every day when he wakes up. He just wakes up, the first thing he says is,
yes,
I am Peter Pan. And
I am
and the other boys are like,
are you ready, boys?
Yeah.
Yes, Peter, you're Peter Pan. Okay, we get it.
5.
Please don't kill us. 5, 6, 7, 8.
So I guess then we have to kind of ask ourselves, because we're drawing so many parallels between those two as individuals, the way they run their regimes and their communities. We still like Peter. I mean, I do. So we have to then think, okay, well, they both have their vices, but what is it that makes Peter that much more? And I think I think this chapter also kind of sums that up, because he shows that he's brave, and that he's actually shows a sort of a sacrificial love that we know that Hook would never show, because he's the kind of guy who would completely.
If it was between Hook and Smee and one raft, who'd be on the raft.
Yeah, exactly. So it just kind of begins to sum up what we value about, good versus bad, and that sort of moral battle, that even though two people can share some very similar traits, there are others that set them apart and make one the hero and one the villain.
But then I also wonder if this is not just a thing of perspective. The fact that we're being told the story from Peter Pan and the children's perspective rather than Hook's perspective means that you immediately identify with him and root for him because he's the person and Hook is presented as the enemy. It's almost like that whole thing when you go and see Wicked, the musical.
Yeah.
And having seen Wizard of Oz, you are rooting for Dorothy the whole way. And then when it flips it on its head and you see it from the other person's perspective, you go, oh, actually, this is actually a real human being with wants, with dreams, with aims, with objectives, with loyalties, with friends, with family, with feelings. And it makes them a lot more three-dimensional. And then you suddenly find yourself finding it very difficult to root against them. And who you perceive as the baddie in that whole story completely shifts. And so I do wonder, I wouldn't say that I'm rooting for Peter because any of his qualities are stand out as being good or righteous or morally correct. Do you know what I mean? I root for him because he is the protagonist. He's the name on the front cover. And he's the person who I've been told this story from, whose perspective I've been told this story from, and who I've been told to root for, essentially, by the author.
No,
so I don't know. I do wonder. I wouldn't say that there's nothing apart from him giving Wendy the kite. There's not really a lot that's about him that I go, oh yeah, he's a hero. Do you know what I mean? And that's not to say that Hook is like not bad. I just mean that there's not that kind of massive Captain America, morally infallible. There's that doesn't embody Peter Pan doesn't embody that.
He's actually driven by
his whims.
Yeah, it's seldom to do with. Or I need to make the island a better place today. Or
no, exactly.
Or I brought back some presents for the Lost Boys. He doesn't actually at no point is he probably ever thinking about them, and he probably doesn't really care about them individually.
No, he's like, oh look, here comes Hook. How can I screw with him?
Yeah,
today?
basically, another day at the office. That's his job. Yeah,
yeah. How can I irritate him?
I'd love it if Peter Pan didn't actually get into sword fights. He was just like wound him up like prank phone calls. Keeps on ordering a pizza.
Clocks up to the phone.
Keeps on ordering a pizza.
Yeah.
And he has to pay for it. It's like, oh, for God's sake!
Brilliant.
Am I right?
He's been waiting to use that, hasn't he?
That's a good one. This week's terrible.
So, Josh, tell us, where's this story going next week then? Are we going to jump back into the future and kind of continue from chapter 7, or are we going to find out how Peter Pan gets off this rock? What's the chapter title?
The chapter title's not giving much away, as usual.
Oh, as usual, okay.
But chapter 9 is called The Neverbird.
Okay. Is the Neverbird...
So that random bird that you all forgot about that's just floating in the middle of the lagoon at the moment.
Peter Pan
apparently it's quite important.
Some sort of airborne transportation.
Is this going to be like a Frodo the Eagle coming situation?
Yeah, maybe.
I think what he does is he goes and sits in the nest and uses the bird's bill to paddle himself to shore.
He's not going to do the easy option. He uses the bird to call out to Captain Hook.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Neverbird helps Peter in some way to get back to the mainland. That's probably where we're going next. Because it does say in the flying chapter that Peter Pan was very light because he could ride the winds. So maybe a bird could carry him.
Imaginary fish.
If he was that light, he could have hopped on the back of the kite with Wendy.
It's true.
It was too windy.
Whee!
That's two. Amazing.
Oh no.
Right, so if you have any insights or comments on this chapter, you can message us on thelazybookclub@gmail.com.
You can follow us and write to us on Twitter. We're at LazyBookClubPod.
And it's exactly the same on Instagram at LazyBookClubPod.
See you guys next week for chapter 9, The Neverbird.
Ta-ra!